Well, hello everybody, and welcome to a video I should have had out sooner, but I wanted to get a couple more 2019 reads under my belt before I released it, and this is my favorite books released in 2019. Obviously, this will be completely subjective, and also missing, I'm sure, very great entries for the genre that did come out, but it's physically impossible for me to read every book released in 2019 for the fantasy genre, so I'm doing my best here. And I'd love to see your top 10 reads of books released in 2019 down in the comments below as well. Before I get into this though, I do want to address the fantasy awards, which I'm still developing here on the channel. I've delayed them because I want to do them better. In fact, I'm going to be slowing down output on the channel probably a bit here because I'm going to be trying to make all of my videos a little bit better. And just hang with me while I experiment a bit. Can you? That'd be great. I'd really appreciate that. Without any further ado, let's get in the top 10 right now. At number 10, I have Black Leopard, Red Wolf. Now, hear me out. I did not enjoy reading this book, but I feel basically like bound to put it on this list because of how much I absolutely respect what it's doing. It is different than almost anything else I have read in the genre. It's ambitious. It is very well written for what it is going for. But what it is going for is not exactly a pleasant read, at least for me. I am curious to see where this series goes. I think there's more effort put into the pages here than almost anything else I read this year, not even just released in 2019. Just in line by line, this is a technically very impressive approach to writing a fantasy story that brings a whole lot new to the game. So I'm putting this at my number 10 with the biggest asterisk ever of it's not a pleasant read in my opinion, but if you're looking for something different, if you're looking for something that you can appreciate the artistic, authorial effort and intent, this is a very good way to go. At number 9, I have Peace and Turmoil by my good friend and fellow YouTuber here, Elliot Brooks. This one is a nice fantasy political thriller, and for a first-time author, quite the home run in a lot of ways. It's interesting for me to actually see something put out by someone I know, because I was expecting while I was reading this to constantly be thinking like, oh, yep, that seems like something Elliot would do, but no. Pretty much throughout the entire process of reading this, I basically just forgot that it was written by fellow booktuber Elliot Brooks, and it was just a very enjoyable political thriller. If you find the most engaging aspects of fantasy books to you to be the, house versus house, character versus character plotting, Peace and Turmoil will probably be something that will hook you immensely. I did have some pacing problems with it, but overall, I really thought it was a great effort from Elliot here, and I'm excited for the next book in the Dark Shores. Next up, we have one that I read on Kindle, so no book to hold up here, but bing, cause editing, Never Die. It is by Rob J. Hayes. Never Die has a structure that I am going to be thinking about quite a bit because Rob went for a structure that, for me, very much so felt like this is how a video game story plays out. You collect your party members, you go face the big boss, you level up along the way, and that's that. But this structure, which I thought would have just kind of felt not appropriate, instead is leaned into to great effect, where he's embracing the fact that this is kind of what his journey is going down, and it's so action-packed, it's so much fun, there's hardly any space between the action here in this book, that I think Rob accomplished exactly what he wanted to, and Never Die is certainly worth a read for anyone who's really digging some good action scenes, some interesting magic, and honestly, great character work as well. Rob didn't have a whole lot of weak spots here, and for something that's kind of a different structural approach to a fantasy novel, it landed. It landed pretty well, and I'm happy with Never Die. Next up, I'm going to have a controversial pick, because this, I think people are going to want me to put higher, and maybe I should, because Brent Weeks is never an author who's afraid to make bold choices. And this year's finishing off of Lightbringer with The Burning White, he made several additional bold choices. And I enjoyed this book. The characters are strong as ever. It's just really the last maybe fifth of the book where I began to have some pretty strong problems with what Brent did with the end of his series. Nothing that is actually like objectively wrong. This is all coming from very subjective criticisms here, and I think a lot of Lightbringer fans will be completely thrilled with how the series comes to a close. But there's just some handling of how some bad guys are dealt with. There's some character moments and a couple of tropes that really undid some of the tension for me. But I still maintain that Lightbringer is one of the best modern fantasy series of all time. There is very little you can objectively say is wrong about this series, and Brent Weeks is just continual, unrelenting. Here I am as an author, here are the choices I'm going to make, and here are the things I'm going to include in my story, and the influences I'm going to have. It always feels like it's something that's truly from Brent, so big praise for that reason, and it is still a very good conclusion to a awesome fantasy series that I still can't wait to see grow in popularity as the years go on. Next up at number 6, we have some occult fantasy. Ninth House by Lee Bardugo is a phenomenal occult fantasy book set in modern Earth, to the point where like IKEA and Yale will be mentioned. And that's not typically a read I go for, but I could not put this book down. It was the type of reading experience where every time I stopped, I was just kind of itching to pick it up once again. Ninth House's story has an insanely addictive mystery at the center of it. The atmosphere is well realized. The world building and magic system happening within our own world are executed masterfully. As I've said in every video I mentioned, I agree with the Stephen King quote where this is something that's just a step up from what's standard. And I feel like if I was a bit more of the target audience this book, I'd be singing its praises even higher. Right now on the list, we're starting to enter the territory of books that I will just recommend to everybody, and Ninth House is certainly one of them. I have given people copies of Ninth House because it's just that good. At number 5, we have another Kindle read for me because it was free when I got it on Kindle, and I think it still may be. I'm not sure. The Sword of Kagan. I put a bold statement on my thumbnail there where I said this is possibly the future of fantasy, and I stand by that. It's following a lot of the trends we see right now in the genre, where more ideas from different parts of the world and cultures are pulled in to build a world that's a bit different from what's typical for Western fantasy. And the Sword of Kagan doesn't feel like another step forward, it feels like a giant leap forward. It's so character focused with characters you don't typically follow in Western fantasy. The dynamics are fresh. The structure of the story is a bit different than what people are used to. This is a bold effort from an author that landed well. Of course, with any giant leap forward like this, there's going to be growing pains, but I found those to be not nearly as prevalent as I would have expected for something that is such an alternative take on what fantasy can be from a Western author. So Sword of Kagan is going to be one of my top reads probably of the year, regardless of release in 2019 or not. I wish I had kind of held off on my best reads of 2019 video until after I finished it, but this book is actually the reason I put off this video until so late, so I made it into one of them. Cool. At number 4, we have The Dragon Republic. Did you notice how in my interview with the author, I said the name of the wrong book, her third book, which isn't yet to come out, when I was talking about her book to her? That's embarrassing. Also mispronounced her name to her face. Dyslexia. Yay! But The Dragon Republic was an excellent follow-up to the Poppy War, and the further I've gotten from it, the more I have come to believe that it's actually better than the Poppy War. It's rare for me to like a sequel more than the first book in an entry to series, but this is the case here, because mainly of the raising of stakes. While the Poppy War was a magnificent setup for this world, and did have pretty significant climaxes towards the end, and there was no lack of action by any stretch of the imagination, the Dragon Republic is such a growth beyond that in terms of the stakes, in terms of the ramifications for characters, seeing the true horrors of war, which if you've watched the interview I had with the author posted this Wednesday, was something she took great effort to have on display here, and I believe Kwong did a phenomenal job of realizing her vision of having the victims of war, having those that are downtrodden, those in the minority, those who are oppressed, be at the focal point where you feel their suffering during these larger conflicts reached a complete success, and it's something that should be done more often in books like these. So for that reason, The Dragon Republic easily takes a number 4 spot for me. Next up, we have, you know it, you love it, The Rage of Dragons at number 3. Evan Winter won the r/fantasy Stabby Award for Best debut novel for this book, and I completely agree. Everything on this list for me after this book is by a veteran of the genre, and The Rage of Dragons is on par with them in quality. It's a story of revenge set in military fantasy, so there's certainly some groups of people this book is not for. But if you are interested by the idea of a warrior going on a revenge bender and exploring a world that pulls from European and African cultures to create this new and interesting, truly epic and grand scale fantasy story, Rage of Dragons is right up your alley. There's no lack of dragons, there's no lack of violence, there's no lack of character motivation, there's no lack of suffering and failure. It's brutal, it's honest, and it is a borderline masterpiece. I'm drooling for the sequel. Get it out, Evan.
Get it out!
Basically, there's a reason Rage of Dragons has had so much love from Reddit since its release. It's great. Read it. At number 2, we have A Little Hatred by Joe Abercrombie. This book came out of nowhere for me because I honestly have not read the standalone First Law books up until this one, and everyone told me not to read this before reading the other standalones, even though they hadn't read this book yet. I read it without reading them, and hey, I'm sure I had something spoiled for me, but this was still a brilliant read, and I loved it. This has been said to death online, by myself included, but what makes Joe Abercrombie's books so special is his character and relationship works, and how everything within his very well thought out plots stems from these very well motivated characters. You're never going to have just a MacGuffin moment. This is a human story in a pretty minimalist magic fantasy world because it's not focused on that. It's focused on the people. And I've yet to meet someone who's picked up First Law who has not been stunned by how much they love to hate some of these people, how much they just love them, how much they just hate them. Everyone he introduces is going to cause a visceral response from you, and A Little Hatred is no exception to that rule, and this also gets maybe Best Cover of the Year award from me. I really like this cover. Pretty great cover. I like it. It's pretty dope. Either this or the Dragon Republic. I really like the Dragon Republics too. Well, we all know number 1. I've touted this series' praises all year. I've kind of had a journey reading this author's books this year, and number 1 was a 2019 release, and that would be Holy Sister. Now the book pile is high enough that I can just put this there, and it will fall. Holy Sister by Mark Lawrence. Now note, this is a subjective list, and I will go ahead and state one of my biases when it comes to lists like this. If you're able to stick a landing, I will flood you with brownie points, because it's kind of rare to find a book that ends a series or trilogy or what have you that is fantastic and has cathartic endings across the board. Holy Sister is exactly that. The Book of the Ancestor and the Story of Nona is a series you need a little bit of patience with at the beginning, because it has a slower start. But if you're able to sit with it and continue on this journey, Book 2 and 3 both just increase in quality to the point where Holy Sister, I declare a masterpiece. Every possible plot thread is resolved exactly how I wanted it to be, or not, but in a better way than I thought it would be. The writing itself is addictive. Mark Lawrence, no matter what book you read of his, you can tell, knows how to handle characters, knows how to evolve them, knows how to build relationships, knows how to make them interact with the world and have the world influence them and them influence the world once they're powerful. Like, just across the board. All the check marks. Check, 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 check. And I'll definitively say that Holy Sister and Book of the Ancestor as a whole has entered into my upper echelon of favorite fantasies that I will be constantly bugging people I know to read, because Nona is the best protagonist I read this year. Spoiler warning for the Fantasy Awards if I do decide to just make it something that I choose the winners, because I didn't come across a better protagonist this year than Nona. So this has been my top 10 reads of 2019. Please go ahead and put your list in the comments down below. I cannot wait to see what people think and their opinions are, and get more recommendations for 2020. I'm hoping to do a better job of reading like every major or super quality release of 2020 that comes out. There's already a couple I'm really keeping my eye on, but 2019 was certainly a phenomenal year for fantasy, because every book on this list deserves praise and discussion, and that's what I look forward to here on the channel, is seeing you you all talk about these books in the Discord server, on Twitter, in my DMs, sending me your rambling thoughts I may or may not eventually get back to, or just in the comment section down below. So like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Thank you to the recent flood of Patreons. It's been very reaffirming as I enter January, which is like the lowest ad revenue month for YouTube. And have a good one, y'all. Peace.